In July 1999, three students from Portland, Eric Stevens, Jonathan Price, and Lisa Carter, set out on a 5-day hike in Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest. They never returned. Their car was discovered locked near Trillium Lake, and traces of their campsites were found along the trail, yet the students themselves had vanished without a trace. For weeks, rangers and volunteers combed the dense forests and steep canyons. Helicopters circled overhead, dogs followed scents that suddenly disappeared on rocky ground, and investigators uncovered disturbing clues: a tent slashed to pieces, a backpack torn open, belongings scattered across the ravine, but no bodies, no clear answers. By the end of summer, the search was called off. 10 years later, a shocking discovery reignited the mystery. Deep inside a hidden cave, 3 skulls were found mounted on wooden stakes, each turned toward the entrance like silent guardians. DNA confirmed the worst: these were the missing students. The deliberate arrangement suggested something far more sinister than an accident in the wilderness. What happened in the forests of Mount Hood, and who left behind this chilling display? Eric Stevens was 21 years old, a geology student at Portland State University. Among the three, he was the most familiar with Mount Hood National Forest. For 2 summers, he had worked as an assistant on geological expeditions, analyzing the soil and rock formations of the very trails they planned to cross. Friends described him as methodical and curious, someone who found beauty in stone layers and fault lines. To his parents, Carol and Roger, Eric was the responsible one, steady, thoughtful, and protective of his friends. It was no surprise that he took charge of planning the hike, carefully mapping out the route and selecting the campsites. Jonathan Price, 22, studied biology at the same university. More relaxed in demeanor, he was known for carrying a notebook everywhere, sketching plants and jotting down observations. His father, Robert, said Jonathan was fascinated by the natural world, eager to connect classroom knowledge with real field experiences. Friends recalled his humor and optimism, the kind of presence that kept spirits high when trails grew steep. Jonathan wasn't as experienced in the wilderness as Eric, but he trusted his friend's judgment and welcomed the adventure. Lisa Carter was the youngest, only 19, a sophomore majoring in ecology. She rented a small apartment near campus and often spoke about her dream of becoming an environmental researcher. Her mother, Patricia, remembered Lisa's compassion. She volunteered at local shelters, cared deeply about animals, and was always willing to help others. To those who knew her, Lisa was vibrant, eager to test herself against the challenges of the forest, and proud to join her older friends on a journey that seemed like both a test and an escape. The plan itself was simple but ambitious: a 5-day trek covering roughly 40 kilometers through the less-traveled eastern side of Mount Hood National Forest. Eric marked 3 overnight stops on his map, first at Salmon Creek, then a clearing near a rocky outcrop, and finally at the foot of Defiance Mountain. The trio agreed to leave Eric's Jeep Cherokee at Trillium Lake, keys hidden under the wheel, a common practice so that anyone in need could access the car. On the morning of July 27, Eric picked up Jonathan from his dorm and Lisa from her apartment. A neighbor recalled seeing Lisa carrying a large hiking backpack, smiling as she climbed into the Jeep. Their last known stop was a gas station along Highway 26, where Eric bought energy bars, water, and another map of the area. From there, they drove toward the trailhead, unaware that this would be the final time anyone saw them alive. They were young, full of curiosity, and ready for adventure. But in the wilderness of Mount Hood, where beauty conceals danger, their journey would become the beginning of a haunting mystery that would linger for decades. The morning of the 27th of July 1999 began with a sense of excitement. Eric's Jeep Cherokee rolled out of Portland just after sunrise, carrying the 3 friends toward the wilderness that had always fascinated them. Lisa's neighbor, Mary Wilson, remembered watching the young woman step outside with a bright smile, balancing a heavy hiking pack on her shoulders. She waved quickly before climbing into the back seat of the Jeep. It was a fleeting image, one that later became etched in memory as the last time Lisa was seen alive. At 8:20 a.m., their trip was confirmed by a stop at a Shell gas station on Highway 26. Cashier David Rogers later identified Eric from a photo. He bought water bottles, energy bars, and a folded trail map. Jonathan and Lisa stayed inside the Jeep, their faces only glimpsed through the glass. To investigators, that moment became the final verifiable sighting before the group stepped into the unknown. By mid-morning, the Jeep was parked at Trillium Lake. The vehicle would remain there for days, undisturbed, keys tucked carefully under the wheel as the friends had planned. Inside, police later found an empty water bottle, a detailed road map with 3 campsites circled, and Lisa's sunglasses resting on the dashboard. Small, ordinary objects, yet, in hindsight, they became haunting artifacts of a vanished journey. The trail from the lake began easily enough, winding through spruce forests where sunlight filtered in golden shafts. The first 8 kilometers were well-trodden, leading them to Salmon Creek. Search teams would later find evidence that the students camped there on their first night. A ring of stones from a campfire, food wrappers, and a white sock that matched Lisa's size. The forest still carried traces of their presence, as if frozen in time. On the second night, the group likely reached the clearing near the rocky outcrop marked on Eric's map. There, rangers discovered trampled ground, scraps of food, and a length of rope, dangling from a tree, used, perhaps, to hang food away from animals. Nothing suggested panic or danger. If anything, it appeared to be a normal stop along their carefully planned route. The next destination was the foot of Defiance Mountain, where Eric intended to camp on their third night. But unlike the earlier sites, this place held no trace of their stay. Rangers hiked for an entire day before reaching the area, and yet there was nothing. No fire pit, no scattered cans, no footprints. It was as if the students had vanished before they ever arrived. The last words we have from them come not from witnesses but from Jonathan's notebook, later recovered in the ravine. On July 30, he wrote, "Day 3. Reached the rocks. Eric found some interesting samples. Tomorrow, we're going further east. After that, the pages fall silent." By August 1, when the friends failed to return to Portland, their families grew uneasy. Eric's mother called his cell phone over and over, hearing only the endless ring. Jonathan's father contacted the forest rangers that same evening. What had begun as a joyful summer trek had already shifted into something darker, an absence too deep to ignore, and the first stirrings of a mystery that would confound investigators for the next decade. When the students failed to return by August 1, their families could no longer dismiss the silence as a simple delay. Eric's mother, Carol, had been calling his cell phone since July 29, but every attempt ended in the same hollow ring. Jonathan's father, Robert, drove to the ranger station that evening, his voice tight with urgency. By the morning of August 2, the official search had begun. Senior Ranger Thomas McKenzie, a veteran with 15 years of experience in Oregon's forests, was placed in charge. He divided his team into 3 groups, 12 rangers in total, joined by 6 skilled volunteers from a local mountaineering club. The plan was straightforward: retrace the route marked on Eric's map and identify each campsite one by one. The first breakthrough came quickly. At Salmon Creek, they found clear traces of human presence: a circle of stones where a campfire had burned, food wrappers scattered on the ground, and plastic grocery bags drifting in the underbrush. The strongest sign was a white sock discovered by Ranger James Wheeler in the bushes, later confirmed to match Lisa's shoe size. Hope surged, at least they had been here, alive and together. The next day, the second site revealed itself in the clearing by the rocky outcrop. Again, there were remnants of a camp, trampled earth, the faint char of a fire, scraps of food. A rope about a meter long still hung from a tree, likely used to suspend food from scavenging animals. It looked like an ordinary stop, orderly and calm. Nothing here suggested distress. But the optimism ended when the teams pushed toward Defiance Mountain. The trail narrowed, grew steeper, and the forest closed in. Hours of searching revealed no third campsite, no fire ring, no belongings. It was as if the 3 students had simply vanished before reaching their final destination. The absence itself became the most unsettling clue. Dogs were brought in to follow the scent from the earlier camps. For a time, they picked up the trail, weaving through the undergrowth with determination. But on the rocky slope beneath Defiance Mountain, the trail abruptly ended. The animals circled, confused, before falling silent. Whatever path the students had taken seemed to dissolve into stone. Then, on August 8, came the most disturbing discovery. A search dog named Rex led his handler into a ravine 2 kilometers from Mount Defiance. There, scattered across 20 square meters, lay the shredded remains of a tent. Its blue fabric matched the one Eric had carried, but it had been slashed into ribbons, the cuts sharp and deliberate. No blood was found, no signs of animal attack. Nearby lay Jonathan's backpack, torn open with its contents strewn across the ground. Damp clothes, a camping stove, canned food, and his weathered notebook. The last entry was chilling in its simplicity. Day 3. Reached the rocks. Eric found some interesting samples. Tomorrow, we're going further east. Beside the backpack, his sleeping bag lay in tatters, a clean cut running down its length. Inside were his jeans and t-shirt, recognized by his parents. The discovery transformed the search into a criminal investigation. Detectives joined the rangers. Helicopters circled twice daily, and thermal imaging scanned the terrain. For weeks, volunteers combed ridges, ravines, and caves within a 10-kilometer radius. Yet nothing more appeared: no footprints, no further belongings, and most importantly, no bodies. By early September, after exhausting every lead, the search was reluctantly suspended. Over 50 square kilometers of forest had been scoured, but the 3 friends had dissolved into silence. For their families, the decision was devastating. For investigators, it marked the beginning of a far deeper mystery, one that would not resurface until a decade later. When the official search ended in September 1999, the forest seemed to swallow the 3 students whole. For investigators, the case became another entry in the archive of unsolved disappearances. But for their families, it was a wound that never closed. Silence replaced certainty, and each day stretched into an echo of unanswered questions. Eric's father, Roger Stevens, refused to let the matter rest. Every weekend, rain or shine, he drove into Mount Hood National Forest, armed with maps and a compass, scouring new sections of wilderness on his own. Friends said he became a man obsessed, mapping valleys and ridges by hand, convinced that somewhere out there lay the truth about his son. Lisa's mother, Patricia Carter, found her strength in organizing. She rallied a group of volunteers, neighbors, students, even strangers who had read about the case to continue searching. For months after the official effort had ended, Patricia's group scoured ravines and creek beds, sometimes covering areas already explored by rangers, hoping that a small, overlooked detail might reveal itself. But each expedition ended the same way, with nothing. Jonathan's family turned to records and reports. His father reread the search logs line by line, replaying the final known moments of his son's life, as if some hidden clue lay in the phrasing of a ranger's note. But the trail was empty. The notebook's last words, "Tomorrow, we're going further east." A final line without an ending. Seasons passed. Snow fell and melted. New hikers came and went. Yet the mystery lingered like a shadow over the eastern slopes of Mount Hood. Rumors grew. Whispers of wild animals, of hermits living in the caves, of things too dark to explain. Locals avoided the area around Defiance Mountain, its trails slowly fading into disuse. For 10 long years, the silence remained unbroken. The forest kept its secret, and the families lived in the unbearable tension of not knowing, half clinging to hope, half resigned to grief. It was not until 2009, when a team of geologists descended into a narrow crevice, that the silence was finally shattered, and with it came a revelation far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. For nearly a decade, the forest had offered no answers. Then, on the 23rd of May 2009, a group of geologists from the University of Oregon stumbled upon something that would reopen the case in the most horrifying way imaginable. Daniel Clark, a professor of geology, was leading graduate student Marcus Lawrence and technician Kevin O'Connor through the rugged terrain northeast of the original search area. Their task was routine collecting rock samples to map mineral deposits, but what they uncovered that afternoon was anything but ordinary. At around 2 o'clock, Lawrence descended into a 12-meter crevice to gather specimens. His flashlight beam cut across the cave walls and froze. There, embedded in the shadows, were 3 objects that did not belong to stone. He blinked, heart racing, as the light revealed the unmistakable outline of human skulls. The skulls were not lying scattered on the cave floor. They were impaled on wooden stakes, driven firmly into cracks in the rock wall, each one elevated 1.5 meters above the ground. Even more chilling, all 3 were turned toward the cave entrance, as though deliberately arranged to watch whoever stepped inside. Lawrence called out in panic, and soon Clark and O'Connor joined him, confirming the grim sight. None of them dared to touch the remains. Instead, they scrambled back up to the surface and placed an urgent call to Hood River County Police. Within hours, Detective David Miller arrived with medical examiner Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins and forensic photographer Steve Adams. Reaching the site required climbing equipment. When the team finally descended, the scene was recorded in painstaking detail. The stakes, about 40 centimeters long, were carved from local oak, one end sharpened to anchor into the rock, the other used to impale the skulls. Tool marks suggested they had been cut with a large blade, perhaps a hunting knife. Dr. Hawkins performed a preliminary examination. The bones were clean, stripped of tissue, and showed signs of long exposure to the elements. Eric's skull bore a small crack along the left temple, possibly from a blunt strike or a fall. Jonathan's teeth showed chips, but whether caused in life or after death remained uncertain. Lisa's skull, eerily intact, revealed no signs of trauma at all. The cave itself measured 4 by 6 meters, with a low ceiling and a floor strewn with dry leaves and small stones. At its center lay the remains of a fire pit, ashes and charcoal compressed into a shallow ring of rocks. Judging by their condition, fires had been lit here multiple times, though the most recent had burned out over a year earlier. Scattered nearby were a tin can pried open with a can opener, a plastic water bottle, and a short piece of rope. Each item whispered of human presence. Someone had camped here, returned here, used this cave for more than just concealment. When DNA tests were completed weeks later, the results confirmed the worst fears of the families. The skulls belonged to Eric Stevens, Jonathan Price, and Lisa Carter. After 10 years of uncertainty, the missing students were no longer missing. But closure did not come with relief. It came with horror. The deliberate arrangement of the skulls turned the forest mystery into something darker. This was not the work of nature, nor a simple accident. It was the product of human hands, precise and purposeful. Whoever had carried the skulls into the cave had taken time to place them evenly, facing outward like guardians of some macabre ritual. The stakes themselves had been cut from trees less than a year before the discovery, suggesting that long after the students vanished, someone returned to disturb their remains and display them in this haunting way. For the families, the confirmation brought grief and fury. For investigators, it transformed the case into a chilling puzzle. Not just a disappearance, but a crime staged with intent. And for the quiet communities near Mount Hood, it became a nightmare legend. A reminder that something, or someone, had once moved silently in those forests, leaving behind a tableau of death that defied explanation. The discovery of the students' skulls forced investigators to re-examine older missing persons cases in Oregon's wilderness. When Detective David Miller dug into the archives, one file in particular stood out, a family disappearance that had haunted police more than a decade earlier. In October 1997, nearly 2 years before Eric, Jonathan, and Lisa vanished, the Coleman family set out on what was supposed to be a simple 3-day hike near Mount Jefferson, roughly 80 kilometers southeast of Mount Hood. Roger and Cindy Coleman, along with their 2 children, one 5-year-old Brad and one 2-year-old Emily, were experienced hikers. Their station wagon was later found abandoned in a parking lot at the trailhead. But beyond that, there were no traces, no campsite, no belongings, not even the bent branches that usually signal human passage. It was as if the forest had erased them completely. Detective Richard Black, who had led the original search, recalled the frustration of combing the trails for a month and finding nothing. The absence of evidence was so complete, it seemed unnatural. For years, the case remained unsolved, a silent echo in the state's record of disappearances. Now, with the Mount Hood case reignited, Miller expanded the search radius around the cave where the students' skulls had been found. Local spelunkers from the Portland Speleological Club provided detailed maps showing dozens of hidden crevices and caves that had rarely, if ever, been explored. Systematic sweeps began, checking one cave after another. The breakthrough came in a small cavern about 4 kilometers west of the original site. Inside, scattered across the floor, were bones, fragments of ribs, vertebrae, arm and leg bones. Mixed among them were scraps of clothing, synthetic fabric from jackets, metal buttons, a zipper corroded with time. Forensic testing later confirmed that the remains belonged to 3 members of the Coleman family, Roger, Cindy, and their teenage son, Brad. The condition of the bones suggested they had lain undisturbed for at least a decade. Dry cave air had preserved them well, though soft tissue had long since vanished. No obvious signs of violence appeared on the skeletons. Instead, they seemed to have been placed, or left, in that cavern without explanation. But one question loomed larger than all the rest. Where was Emily Coleman? The 2-year-old's remains were not among those recovered. Every crevice within a 20-kilometer radius was searched in the weeks that followed. Rangers scoured narrow passages, spelunkers squeezed into dangerous fissures, and investigators even used ground-penetrating radar in select areas. Yet Emily was never found. Her absence deepened the mystery. Had she perished elsewhere in the forest, her body hidden by nature? Or had she been taken spared from the fate of her family, only to vanish into an even darker story? The parallels between the Coleman family and the 3 students were impossible to ignore. Both groups had vanished in remote, rugged terrain. Both had traces discovered in caves years later, and both carried the unmistakable signature of deliberate concealment, remains hidden away, arranged in ways that suggested the hand of a calculating perpetrator rather than chance. For investigators, the Coleman connection shifted the timeline of terror backward. If the students had been victims of something malevolent in 1999, then the same force may have already claimed an entire family 2 years before. The forest no longer seemed like a backdrop for accidents or random misfortune. It appeared to be the hunting ground of someone or something that knew how to erase lives without leaving answers behind. With 2 disappearances, an entire family in 1997, and 3 college students in 1999, now tied together by the discovery of remains in hidden caves, investigators faced a chilling realization. These were not isolated tragedies. But if chance could not explain them, what could? Over the years, several theories emerged, each attempting to shed light on the darkness within Mount Hood's wilderness. 1. A serial predator in the forest. The most widely considered explanation was that of a skilled individual, perhaps a hunter or survivalist, who knew the terrain intimately. The caves were difficult to access, requiring climbing knowledge and physical strength. The deliberate placement of skulls on oak stakes suggested patience, precision, and intent traits consistent with a calculating killer. Investigators reviewed the backgrounds of hunters, ex-military personnel, and anyone with a criminal record for violent offenses within a 100-kilometer radius. Dozens of names were checked, but no suspect matched both the profile and the timeline. Still, the possibility of a predator lurking in Oregon's forests has never been ruled out. 2. Cult or ritualistic killings. The eerie arrangement of the skulls pointed many toward ritual explanations. Some theorized the involvement of a secretive cult, one that used the forest's hidden caves for ceremonies. The symmetrical spacing, the orientation toward the cave entrance, and the use of wooden stakes resembled symbolic displays rather than mere disposal of remains. Yet no evidence linked known groups in Oregon to such practices. Experts in local history dismissed the idea that surviving native tribes were involved, clarifying that the Vasco people, once rumored to use skulls in rituals, had left the area in the 19th century. Still, for the families, the scene carried a weight of something ceremonial, as though their loved ones had been transformed into unwilling participants in an ancient script. 3. A hermit or mentally unstable recluse. Another theory centered on the idea of a lone individual living off the grid, someone whose isolation and mental instability could manifest in grotesque behaviors. The cave's remoteness would have suited a person hiding from society. Strange rumors circulated about the hermit of Mount Hood, though no such figure was ever identified. The idea lingered in part because it explained both the concealment of remains and the absence of further victims. After 1999, perhaps the hermit died, or simply vanished as mysteriously as the people he left behind. 4. Random accidents and natural causes. Skeptics argued that the victims may have died from exposure, accidents, or disorientation, their remains later manipulated by opportunists. The slashed tents and torn packs, they suggested, could have been staged, but this theory failed to explain why skulls were carefully impaled on stakes years after decomposition. Nature could scatter bones, but not orchestrate them into a deliberate tableau. 5. The missing Emily Coleman. Perhaps the most unsettling element was the absence of 12-year-old Emily Coleman. Her parents', brother, and mother's remains were eventually identified in a cave, but Emily's body was never found. Did she die elsewhere, her remains still hidden in the labyrinth of Mount Hood, or was she taken alive, spared only to vanish into another fate? Some whispered that she might have been forced to live with her family's killer, or even become entangled in the strange ritualistic acts themselves. In the end, none of the theories provided definitive answers. A predator, a cult, a hermit, each seemed plausible, and yet each lacked proof. What united them was the chilling suggestion that someone had used the wilderness not only to hide crimes, but to stage them with meaning. For the families, these explanations brought no closure. For locals, they deepened fear. And for investigators, the unanswered questions became part of Oregon's most enduring forest legend, that within the silent caves of Mount Hood lies a truth too dark and too carefully hidden to ever be revealed. By late 2009, after 6 months of renewed investigations, the official search once again fell silent. More than 200 interviews had been conducted, every cave within a 30-kilometer radius had been mapped and explored, and countless theories had been weighed. And yet, the truth remained as elusive as the first day the students vanished. The case was formally suspended, transferred once more into the archives of unsolved crimes. For the families, the final confirmation of death brought only partial closure. Funerals were held in Portland for Eric, Jonathan, and Lisa, attended by hundreds who remembered them not as victims, but as vibrant young people with futures ahead. The Coleman family was laid to rest in Salem, though one grave remained symbolically empty, Emily's, her absence a wound that could never heal. Detective Miller admitted, with a tone of resignation, that without new evidence, the mystery would likely never be solved. The deliberate arrangement of skulls, the eerie concealment of bones, and the missing child all pointed to human hands. But whose? That question lingered unanswered, echoing in the silence of the forest. In the years that followed, Mount Hood National Forest carried the weight of its dark reputation. Trails once popular with hikers grew over with moss and fallen branches as locals chose safer routes. Rangers noted a sharp decline in visitors around Defiance Mountain. Some who ventured there spoke of an oppressive stillness, as though the woods themselves held back a secret too heavy to share. The caves remain open, scattered through ridges and canyons like hidden mouths in the earth. Most lie empty, but the memory of what was found inside them, skulls on stakes, bones on cold stone floors, ensures that few dare to linger. For many, these discoveries blurred the line between crime and legend, transforming the wilderness into a place haunted not by spirits, but by the calculated cruelty of an unknown hand. Today, the story of the students and the Coleman family endures as one of Oregon's darkest mysteries. Parents lost children, and a young girl disappeared into silence, perhaps forever. Theories abound, but no truth has emerged. And so the forest keeps its secret, the caves standing as silent witnesses, their walls echoing only with the wind. In the end, the tragedy of Mount Hood reminds us of a chilling truth. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and some secrets of the wilderness are destined to remain buried in the shadows, waiting, watching just like the skulls that once stared from the darkness of a cave.